Have you ever wondered what it would be like to fall in love during the most magical celebration in the world, only to discover that the person who captured your heart isn't entirely human? Tonight, I'm sharing the story of Lauren Foster, an American artist who traveled to Venice for Carnevale, and Sebastian Kharos, the mysterious gentleman who would change her life forever. This is a tale of masks and revelations, of ancient secrets hidden in plain sight, and of a love that defied the boundaries between life and death. Welcome to The Vampire of Venice. Lauren Foster had always dreamed of experiencing Carnevale in Venice. As a painter specializing in Renaissance art, she'd spent years studying the works of Titian, Tintoretto, and Veronese, but she'd never set foot in the floating city that had inspired them. At 28, she'd finally saved enough money from her gallery commissions to make the journey, timing her visit to coincide with the legendary festival that transformed Venice into a realm of fantasy and mystery. She arrived on a gray February afternoon, 3 days before the official start of Carnevale. The water taxi carried her through the winding canals, past ancient palazzos whose facades seemed to emerge directly from the lagoon. The winter light gave everything a silvery quality, and Lauren found herself reaching for her sketchbook even before she'd checked into her hotel. Her accommodation was a small but charming pensione near the Campo Santa Margherita, run by an elderly woman named Signora Bellini who spoke broken English but communicated volumes through expressive hand gestures. The room was modest, with a single window overlooking a narrow canal, but Lauren loved it immediately. She could hear the water lapping against the buildings, the distant calls of gondoliers, and the echoing footsteps of pedestrians crossing the nearby bridge. That first evening, Lauren wandered the streets alone, getting pleasantly lost in the labyrinth of alleyways and small squares. She crossed countless bridges, each offering a different perspective on the city's eternal dance with water. As darkness fell, the street lamps cast golden pools of light on the ancient stones, and Lauren felt as though she'd stepped back in time. She found herself in Piazza San Marco just as the last tourists were leaving for the day. The vast square was nearly empty, the basilica's Byzantine domes silhouetted against the deepening blue sky. Lauren stood there, breathing in the cold air, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on this magical space. It was then that she first saw him. He stood near the columns at the edge of the square, a tall figure in a long black coat, perfectly still while everyone else around him moved. Even from a distance, there was something striking about his posture, an old-fashioned formality that seemed to belong to a different era. Lauren found herself staring, her artist's eye appreciating the composition he created against the backdrop of the lagoon. As if sensing her gaze, the man turned his head slowly in her direction. Even though she couldn't make out his features in the twilight, Lauren felt a jolt of recognition, though she was certain they'd never met. For a long moment, they regarded each other across the empty piazza. Then a group of laughing teenagers ran between them, breaking the spell, and when Lauren looked again, the man was gone. She told herself it meant nothing, just a random moment in a city full of strangers. But as she walked back to her pensione, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred, that some invisible thread had been pulled taut between her and the mysterious stranger. Part 2. The Masquerade. Carnevale officially began 2 days later, and Venice transformed overnight. Suddenly, the streets were filled with people in elaborate costumes and masks. Lauren saw commedia dell'arte characters, Baroque lords and ladies, fantastical creatures of mythology, and countless revelers in the traditional bottom masks that had once allowed Venetian citizens to move through the city anonymously. Lauren had purchased her own mask at a small artisan shop in Dorsoduro, a beautiful Colombina half-mask decorated with gold leaf and peacock feathers. She wore it with a vintage green velvet dress she'd found at a thrift store in Brooklyn, feeling both excited and slightly ridiculous as she joined the costumed crowds. The streets were a riot of color and music. Spontaneous performances broke out on bridges and in small squares. Street vendors sold frittelle and galani, the traditional sweets of Carnevale. The air itself seemed to vibrate with possibility, with the sense that during these magical days, anything could happen. Lauren spent the morning sketching the costumes and masks, filling page after page of her sketchbook with quick studies of the incredible variety of characters she encountered. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the man approaching until he spoke. "You capture them well. The masks." The voice was cultured, with a slight accent she couldn't quite place, British perhaps, but with something else underneath. Lauren looked up from her sketchbook to find the man from the piazza standing before her. In daylight, or rather in the diffuse light filtering through the Venice clouds, She could see him properly for the first time. He was perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and pale skin that suggested he didn't spend much time in the sun. His features were aristocratic, almost severe, but softened by surprisingly expressive dark eyes. He wore modern clothes, but somehow made them look formal, as though he was uncomfortable with contemporary casualness. "Thank you," Lauren managed, suddenly aware of how she must look, perched on a bridge railing with her sketchbook balanced on her knees. "I'm trying to capture the spirit of it all, but it's almost too much. Everywhere I look, there's something incredible. May I?" He gestured to the sketchbook, and Lauren handed it to him, watching his face as he slowly turned the pages. His expression remained neutral, but she thought she detected genuine interest in his eyes. "You have a gift," he said finally, returning the sketchbook. "You see beyond the surface. These aren't just costumes you've drawn. You've captured something of the souls beneath the masks." Lauren felt herself blushing at the compliment. "That's kind of you to say, Mr. Kharos. Sebastian Kharos." He offered his hand, and Lauren shook it, noting how cold his fingers felt despite the leather gloves he wore. "And you are?" "Lauren Foster. I'm from New York. Just here for Carnevale." "A pilgrimage, then, to the source of so much beauty and mystery." Sebastian's lips curved in a slight smile. "And are you finding what you came for?" "More than I expected," Lauren admitted. "It's overwhelming in the best way. Though I have to admit, I'm a bit lost, geographically and otherwise." "Then perhaps you would allow me to serve as your guide? I know Venice well. Very well indeed." There was something in the way he said it, an emphasis that suggested depths of meaning, but Lauren was too charmed to analyze it carefully. Here was this intriguing, handsome stranger offering to show her the city, and every romantic instinct she possessed was telling her to say yes. "I'd like that," she said. "Though I should warn you, I tend to stop constantly to sketch things." "I have time," Sebastian replied, and again there was that subtle emphasis that suggested he meant something more than the simple words conveyed. "Shall we begin?" Sebastian proved to be an extraordinary guide. He led Lauren through parts of Venice she would never have found on her own, tiny campi hidden away from the tourist routes, churches filled with masterpieces that few visitors ever saw, workshops where craftsmen still practiced trades that had been passed down through generations. But it was his knowledge that truly impressed her. He didn't just know the history of the places they visited. He spoke of it with the kind of detail and intimacy that usually comes from extensive academic study. When they stood in the church of San Sebastiano, surrounded by Veronese's magnificent paintings, Sebastian described not just the technical brilliance of the work but the political and social context of its creation, the personality of the artist, even the specific pigments used and where they would have been sourced. "You must be an art historian," Lauren said as they emerged back into the late afternoon light. Sebastian hesitated for just a moment. "I have studied art extensively. Among other things." "What other things?" "History, philosophy, the nature of time and memory, the question of what remains when everything else fades away." He spoke lightly, but Lauren sensed something deeper in his words, a melancholy that seemed at odds with the festive atmosphere surrounding them. They walked along the Fondamenta del Zattera, the long promenade facing the Giudecca Canal. Across the water, the island of Giudecca was painted in the golden light of the setting sun. Other masked revelers passed them, laughing and singing, but Lauren felt as though she and Sebastian existed in their own private bubble, insulated from the chaos of Carnevale. "Can I ask you something?" Lauren said as they paused at a railing to watch the water. "Last night, or rather 2 nights ago, I saw you in Piazza San Marco. You were just standing there, completely still. What were you doing?" Sebastian didn't answer immediately. He stared out at the water, his profile sharp against the fading light. "Remembering," he said finally. "Venice is a city of memory. Every stone, every reflection in the water, every shadow holds echoes of the past. Sometimes I come to places like that and try to hear what they remember." It was a strange answer, almost poetic, and Lauren didn't quite know how to respond to it. Before she could formulate a reply, Sebastian turned to her with a smile that transformed his serious face. "But enough of my peculiarities. Tell me about your art, Lauren Foster. What draws you to painting? What are you trying to capture? They talked as they walked, Lauren finding herself opening up in a way she rarely did with strangers. She told him about her fascination with Renaissance art, her attempt to bridge historical techniques with contemporary subjects, her constant struggle between commercial success and artistic integrity. Sebastian listened with complete attention, asking insightful questions that showed he understood not just what she was saying but what she meant beneath the words. As night fell completely, they found themselves in a small Baccaro, one of the traditional Venetian wine bars, tucked away in a narrow alley in Cannaregio. The place was packed with locals and costumed revelers, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of fried seafood. Sebastian ordered them both ombra, small glasses of wine, and an array of sacchetti, the Venetian tapas. "You're not eating," Lauren observed after a while, noticing that while she'd made her way through several of the small plates, Sebastian had barely touched his wine. "I ate earlier," he said smoothly. "Please, continue. The baccalà mantecato is particularly good here." They stayed at the Baccaro for hours, the conversation flowing easily between them. Sebastian had traveled extensively, it seemed, and he told stories of places all over the world with the same vivid detail he'd used when describing Venice. Lauren found herself laughing at his dry wit, leaning in closer to hear him over the noise of the crowd, feeling more alive and present than she had in years. It was past midnight when they finally left, stepping out into the cold Venice night. The streets were still filled with costumed figures, and music echoed from various directions. Sebastian walked Lauren back to her pensione, taking a route that seemed to wind through every beautiful corner of the city. They stopped on a small bridge near her hotel, the canal below reflecting the lights of the surrounding buildings in shimmering patterns. Lauren realized she didn't want the evening to end. "Thank you for today," she said. "It was, magical isn't a strong enough word." "The magic of Venice," Sebastian replied. "It has a way of making the impossible seem merely improbable." He paused, seeming to struggle with something internal. "Lauren, I must tell you something. But whatever he was about to say was interrupted by a group of drunk revelers stumbling past them, singing loudly and waving bottles. The moment was broken, and when the group had passed, Sebastian's expression had shifted, becoming guarded again. "Will I see you tomorrow?" Lauren asked. "If you wish it." "I do. Very much." "Then I will find you," Sebastian said. "In this city of masks and mysteries, I will find you." He brought her hand to his lips in a gesture that should have seemed absurdly old-fashioned but instead felt exactly right. His lips were cold against her skin, and she shivered, though not entirely from the temperature. Then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the narrow alley, and Lauren was left standing alone on the bridge, her heart pounding, feeling as though she'd just stepped into a story whose ending she couldn't yet imagine. The next day unfolded like a dream. Sebastian appeared at her pensione in the morning, and they spent the day exploring Venice together, this time venturing to the outer islands. They took the vaporetto to Burano, where the houses were painted in brilliant primary colors, and then to Torcello, the ancient island where Venice itself had begun more than a millennium ago. In the Cathedral of Santa Maria Assunta in Torcello, they stood before the massive Byzantine mosaic of the Last Judgment, and Sebastian told her stories of the craftsmen who had created it, speaking with such vivid detail that Lauren could almost see them at work, piecing together the tiny tiles of glass and gold. "You speak as if you were there," she said, laughing. Sebastian's expression grew serious. "Memory can be so vivid that it becomes almost indistinguishable from experience," he said cryptically. They had dinner at a small restaurant on Burano, sitting at an outdoor table despite the February chill. Or rather, Lauren had dinner while Sebastian sipped wine and watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're going to think I'm crazy," Lauren said, emboldened by the wine and the surreal beauty of the evening, "but I feel like I've known you forever. Like we were meant to meet here, now, during Carnevale." "Perhaps we were," Sebastian replied quietly. "There are some encounters that feel like fate because they are fate. The universe has patterns, Lauren. Rhythms and repetitions. Sometimes two souls are meant to find each other, regardless of the obstacles." "What kind of obstacles?" Lauren asked, but Sebastian shook his head. "Let us not speak of obstacles tonight. Tonight, let us simply be two people in the most beautiful city in the world, during its most magical time." Tomorrow will come soon enough. But tomorrow came sooner than either of them wanted. As they rowed the vaporetto back to Venice, the winter wind whipping across the lagoon, Lauren found herself shivering. Sebastian immediately removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "I'm fine," she protested. "You'll freeze." "I don't feel the cold," he said, and it was true. While Lauren was bundled in layers and still chilled, Sebastian seemed completely comfortable in just his shirt. "I haven't felt it for a very long time." Something in his tone made Lauren look at him more carefully. In the harsh light of the vaporetto, she noticed things she hadn't before. His skin wasn't just pale, it had an almost translucent quality, and she couldn't see any of the small imperfections that marked normal human skin. His stillness, too, was unusual. Most people have small, unconscious movements, shifts and fidgets, but Sebastian sat like a statue, not even seeming to breathe. "Sebastian," she said slowly, "there's something different about you. Something I can't quite put my finger on." He met her eyes, and she saw conflict there, a war between desire and duty, between honesty and self-preservation. "Yes," he said finally. "There is something different about me. Something I should have told you from the beginning, but He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I wanted to have this time with you. These days of normalcy, of pretending to be simply a man meeting a woman, enjoying each other's company. But you deserve the truth, Lauren. You deserve to know what I am. What you are." Lauren repeated, her heart beginning to race. "Sebastian, you're scaring me a little. I don't mean to frighten you. That's the last thing I want." He took her hand, and she felt again how cold his skin was, cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. "Lauren, I am not like other people. I haven't been for a very long time. I am— how to say this? There's no easy way. I am what your folklore would call a vampire." For a long moment, Lauren just stared at him. Then, despite herself, she laughed. "That's not funny, Sebastian. I'm not joking." His expression was grave, almost sad. "I know how it sounds. I know what you must think. But it's the truth. I am a vampire, Lauren. I have been for more than 400 years. Lauren pulled her hand away, moving to the other side of the vaporetto's bench. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what she'd just heard. This was insane. Vampires weren't real. They were myths, stories, Halloween costumes. And yet, as she looked at Sebastian in the harsh light, she couldn't deny that there was something otherworldly about him, something that had always been there but that she'd unconsciously explained away. "This is crazy," she said. "This is completely crazy." "I know." Sebastian made no move to approach her, giving her space. "I wouldn't believe it either, in your position. But consider what you've observed, Lauren. I've shown you Venice as it was in previous centuries. I've told you stories with the kind of detail that comes from lived experience. I don't eat. I don't seem to feel the cold. My skin." He held up his hand in the light. "Look at it. Really look." Lauren did, and she saw what she'd been unconsciously avoiding. His skin didn't look quite human. It was too smooth, too perfect, lacking the tiny variations in color and texture that marked living flesh. "No," she whispered. "This can't be real." "I was born in Constantinople in 1562, Sebastian continued quietly. "I lived an ordinary life for 28 years. Then I met someone who changed everything. She was beautiful and terrible, and she offered me a choice. Die of the plague that was ravaging the city, or accept her gift and live forever. I chose life, not understanding what I was choosing. I have walked this earth for 4 centuries, Lauren. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched the world transform in ways I could never have imagined. And in all that time, I have never felt what I've felt these past 2 days with you." The vaporetto was pulling into the San Zaccaria stop. Other passengers were gathering their belongings, preparing to disembark. The ordinary sounds of life continuing normally seemed bizarre in contrast to the conversation they were having. "I need time," Lauren said, standing up. "I need to think about this. I need to." I understand. Sebastian stood as well but made no move to follow her as she headed for the exit. Lauren, please know that I would never hurt you. Whatever else I am, whatever I've become, I would never harm you. If you want me to leave you alone, I will. I'll disappear from your life, and you can finish your stay in Venice in peace. But if you're willing to hear more, if you want to understand, I'll be in Piazza San Marco tomorrow night at midnight, where we first saw each other. Lauren nodded mutely and hurried off the vaporetto, almost running through the dark streets toward her pensione. Her mind was chaos, a storm of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Part of her was convinced that Sebastian was insane, or that she was, or that this was all some elaborate prank. But another part, the part that had been drawn to him from the first moment, believed him. And that terrified her more than anything else. Lauren didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small bed, listening to the sounds of Carnevale continuing outside her window, and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Vampires. The word seemed ridiculous, like something from a bad movie or a teenage novel. And yet, she thought about everything she'd observed about Sebastian. His knowledge that went beyond even the most dedicated scholar. His peculiar habits regarding food and drink. His skin, his stillness, his quality of existing slightly outside of normal time and space. The way he'd spoken about memory, about centuries, about watching the world change. As dawn broke over Venice, Lauren made a decision. She would go to meet him. She had to know more. She had to understand. And beneath all the fear and confusion, there was something else. A feeling that had been growing since the moment they'd met, a connection that transcended reason or logic. She spent the day in a daze, going through the motions of experiencing Carnevale but barely seeing any of it. The costumes and masks that had seemed so magical before now felt like a metaphor for the hidden nature of reality. How many other secrets was the world keeping? How many other impossible things were true? As midnight approached, Lauren made her way to Piazza San Marco. The square was less crowded than it had been earlier, but there were still plenty of revelers about, their masked faces eerie in the lamplight. She found Sebastian standing in the exact spot where she'd first seen him, near the columns overlooking the lagoon. He turned as she approached, and relief flooded his features. "You came." "I had to know more," Lauren said. "I had to understand. If this is real, if you're really what you say you are, then I need to know everything." "Everything is a long story," Sebastian said with a slight smile. 400 years is a lot to cover. But I'll tell you what I can. Walk with me." They walked through the nighttime streets of Venice, and Sebastian told her his story. He spoke of Constantinople, of the life he'd lived as a merchant's son, of the plague that had struck the city and killed everyone he loved. He described his transformation, the pain and terror and wonder of it. He told her of the centuries that followed, of the places he'd seen and the people he'd known, of the loneliness that came with immortality. "I came to Venice in 1650, he said as they crossed the Rialto Bridge. "I had heard of it, of course, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen, and I knew immediately that I would stay. I have lived here, on and off, ever since. I have watched it change and yet remain somehow essentially itself. Venice is eternal, Lauren, in a way that few places are. It understands time differently. That's why I feel at home here." "Do you?" Lauren hesitated, afraid of the answer. "Do you kill people? For blood?" "No." Sebastian's answer was immediate and firm. "Not for over 200 years. I learned control, learned to take only what I needed without causing harm. I have arrangements with hospitals, blood banks. It's not ideal, but it allows me to exist without becoming a monster." They had reached the Campo Santa Maria Formosa, a lovely square surrounded by cafes and shops. Sebastian led her to a bench, and they sat together in the cold night air. "Why me?" Lauren asked. "Why did you approach me? And please don't tell me it's because you're attracted to my blood or something equally horrifying." Sebastian smiled, a genuine expression that softened his entire face. "No, it's nothing like that. I approached you because when I saw you sketching on that bridge, so absorbed in your work, so fully present in the moment, I felt something I haven't felt in decades. Hope. The possibility of connection. I've been alone for so long, Lauren. I've had relationships, even love affairs, but they're always shadowed by what I am, by the impossibility of a real future. But with you, I felt like perhaps I could have something real, even if only for a little while. But I'm human, Lauren said. I'm going to age and die. How is that not impossible? It is impossible, Sebastian acknowledged. That's what makes it possible, in a strange way. Because there's no pretense of forever, no illusion that we can defeat time. We can only have now, this moment, this beautiful, fragile present. And perhaps that's more honest than most relationships, which pretend at permanence while ignoring the reality of mortality. Lauren sat in silence, processing this. Around them, Venice continued its ancient dance with time and water, a city that understood better than most that beauty and transience were inseparable. I'm not asking for anything, Sebastian continued. I'm not expecting anything. I simply wanted you to know the truth. You came to Venice seeking beauty and mystery, and you found both, though perhaps not in the way you expected. What you do with that knowledge is entirely up to you. Lauren turned to look at him, really look at him, seeing past the surface to the man beneath. A man who had lived for centuries but was still capable of feeling, of longing, of loneliness. A man who was both extraordinary and heartbreakingly human in his desires. I want to keep seeing you, she said quietly. For however long I'm here. I want to know you, Sebastian. All of you. The centuries, the stories, the reality behind the legend. Is that foolish? Perhaps, Sebastian said. But some of the best things in life are foolish. Romeo and Juliet were foolish. Tristan and Isolde were foolish. Perhaps all great love stories require an element of beautiful foolishness. Love story. Lauren raised an eyebrow. Isn't that getting a bit ahead of ourselves? Probably, Sebastian admitted. But I'm 400 years old, Lauren. I've learned to recognize certain things more quickly than I used to. And this, what's happening between us, feels like the beginning of something extraordinary. The remaining days of Carnevale passed in a whirl of wonder and discovery. Lauren and Sebastian became inseparable, spending every night together exploring Venice and talking about everything and nothing. Sebastian showed her parts of his world she could never have imagined, taking her to places that existed outside the normal tourist experience of the city. He brought her to private palazzos where he'd lived over the centuries, rooms that had remained unchanged for hundreds of years. He showed her his collection of art and books, treasures accumulated over a lifetime that spanned half a millennium. He introduced her to others like him, vampires who had made Venice their home, ancient beings who moved through the modern world like ghosts from another time. Lauren learned about the vampire world, its rules and hierarchies, its politics and dangers. She discovered that Sebastian was something of an anomaly among his kind, a vampire who had chosen isolation and study over the pursuit of power. He was respected but not feared, admired for his knowledge but considered slightly eccentric by vampire standards. You're like the Professor Vampire, Lauren joked one night as they sat in his library, surrounded by books in dozens of languages. The scholarly recluse who just wants to be left alone with his research. It's not an inaccurate description, Sebastian admitted. I've never understood the desire for power that drives so many of my kind. What's the point of immortality if you spend it accumulating wealth and influence? I'd rather accumulate knowledge, understanding. I want to comprehend this strange existence I've been given. They spent hours in that library, Sebastian reading to her from ancient texts, translating from Greek and Latin and medieval Italian. Lauren sketched him as he read, trying to capture the way the lamplight played across his features, the intensity of his concentration, the glimpses of humanity that showed through his supernatural nature. But they didn't just stay inside. Venice during Carnevale was too magnificent to ignore. They attended balls in historic palazzos, Lauren in a gown that Sebastian procured from somewhere in his seemingly endless collection of historical clothes. They danced together in ballrooms that had hosted similar celebrations for centuries, Sebastian moving with the grace of someone who had mastered every dance from courtly pavans to modern waltzes. They rode in a private gondola through the smaller canals, Sebastian pointing out details in the architecture that most people never noticed, telling her stories of the people who had lived behind those ancient walls. They attended opera performances and concerts, art exhibitions and poetry readings, experiencing the full richness of Venetian culture. And gradually, inevitably, they fell in love. It happened in small moments. Sebastian's hand finding hers as they walked through the crowds, the way his face lit up when he saw her, the hours they spent just talking about their hopes and dreams and fears. Lauren found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone else, sharing her insecurities about her art, her complicated relationship with her family, her fears about the future. Sebastian, in turn, shared the loneliness of his existence, the weight of centuries, the difficulty of watching everyone he cared about age and die while he remained forever unchanged. He told her about the lovers he'd had over the years, relationships that had ended in heartbreak or worse, his partners begging him to transform them, unable to accept the inevitability of their mortality. "That's not something I do anymore," he told her firmly. "I did it once, about 100 years ago. She said she loved me, said she wanted to be with me forever. So I gave her what she asked for. And within a decade, she hated me for it. She hadn't understood what she was giving up, the fundamental change that transformation brings. She eventually walked into the sun, choosing death over eternal existence. I swore then that I would never do that to anyone again." "I'm not asking you to," Lauren said gently. "I know what this is, Sebastian. I know it has an expiration date. I'm okay with that." But even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. Because being with Sebastian was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. It wasn't just the romance of the setting or the exotic nature of what he was. It was the depth of connection they'd found, the sense that she'd finally met someone who truly understood her. How could she be okay with losing that? The night before Lauren was scheduled to leave Venice, they made love for the first time in Sebastian's bedroom in his palazzo overlooking the Grand Canal. It was tender and passionate and surprisingly human, despite what Sebastian was. Afterwards, they lay together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the city outside the windows. "I don't want to leave," Lauren whispered. "I know I have to, but I don't want to." "Then stay," Sebastian said. "Not forever. I'm not asking you to give up your life. But stay for a while longer. Stay and let us see where this goes." "I can't afford it," Lauren said practically. "I've already spent most of my savings on this trip." "Money isn't an issue for me," Sebastian said. 400 years of compound interest has its advantages. Let me take care of it, Lauren. Let me give us more time." Lauren stayed. She canceled her flight, moved her things to Sebastian's palazzo, and sent emails to her gallery and clients explaining that she was extending her European sojourn for artistic reasons. It wasn't entirely a lie. She'd never been more inspired in her life. She spent her days painting while Sebastian slept, working in a studio he set up for her in a sun-filled room at the top of the palazzo. The light in Venice was unlike anywhere else, that peculiar quality that came from being reflected off water and filtered through mist. She painted constantly, producing work that was unlike anything she'd done before, pieces that seemed to capture something essential about the city and her experience in it. Her nights belonged to Sebastian. They explored every corner of Venice together, from the most famous landmarks to the most obscure. They took day trips to other cities in the Veneto, Sebastian driving them in his vintage sports car to Verona, Vicenza, Padua. He showed her the Italy that tourists never saw, the ancient and the eternal existing alongside the modern. They had their first fight in Verona, standing in Juliet's courtyard surrounded by tourists taking selfies. Sebastian had made some dismissive comment about the commercialization of Shakespeare's tragedy, and Lauren had taken offense, arguing that there was something beautiful in how the story continued to resonate with people centuries later. "You're being a snob," she accused. "Just because you actually lived through the Renaissance doesn't mean you get to look down on how modern people engage with history." "I'm not being a snob," Sebastian protested. "I'm simply pointing out the irony of people queuing up to touch a bronze statue's breast in the name of love. The irony doesn't invalidate the sincerity of their feelings," Lauren shot back. "Love is love, whether it's expressed through touching a statue or reading a centuries-old play or falling for a vampire in Venice. It's all the same fundamental human need to connect, to believe in something bigger than ourselves." They'd stared at each other for a long moment, and then Sebastian had laughed, a real laugh that drew stares from the other tourists. "You're absolutely right," he said. "And I'm absolutely a snob. Thank you for calling me on it." They'd kissed right there in the courtyard, and Lauren had felt triumphant in a way that had nothing to do with winning an argument, and everything to do with the realization that this was real, that they could fight and make up like any normal couple. But they weren't a normal couple, and that reality asserted itself in various ways. Lauren learned to adjust her schedule to Sebastian's nocturnal existence. She discovered the peculiarities of living with someone who didn't eat human food, didn't appear in mirrors, couldn't go out during the day. She met more of Sebastian's vampire acquaintances and learned the complex politics of the undead world. Some of them were welcoming, fascinated by Sebastian's human companion and willing to share their own stories. Others were cold or even hostile, viewing Lauren as a distraction at best and a security risk at worst. There were rules, she learned, about how vampires interacted with humans, rules that Sebastian was bending if not breaking by his openness with her. "They think I'm being reckless," Sebastian explained one night after a particularly tense encounter with an older vampire named Cosima. "They think I'm going to expose us all by trusting you too much." "And are you?" Lauren asked. "Being reckless?" "Probably," Sebastian admitted. "But I don't care. Life, or whatever this is that I have, is too short to live entirely by fear. I trust you, Lauren. More than I've trusted anyone in a very long time." As the weeks turned into months, Lauren found herself settling into a strange new existence. She'd sublet her apartment in New York, arranged for her gallery to ship her paintings directly from Venice, and essentially built a new life in this floating city. Her work was flourishing in ways she'd never imagined, infused with the magic and mystery of her experiences. But there was a shadow over their happiness, one that grew longer as time passed. Lauren was aging. It was imperceptible day to day, but she could see it in her paintings, in the photographs she took. A new line here, a slight change there. She was 28, still young by any measure, but next to Sebastian's eternal youth, she felt the weight of mortality pressing down on her. They didn't talk about it, not directly. But it was there in the careful way Sebastian looked at her sometimes, a sadness in his eyes that spoke of all the people he'd watched grow old and die. It was there in the way Lauren found herself studying her reflection, counting the days and weeks and months, calculating how much time they might have together. The crisis came in late spring, 3 months after Lauren had extended her stay. They were at a gallery opening, one of the endless cultural events that filled Venice's social calendar. Lauren had been introduced as Sebastian's companion to various art world figures, and she'd watched with growing discomfort as several women, all impossibly beautiful and ageless, had flirted openly with Sebastian right in front of her. "They're vampires, aren't they?" she said later, back at the palazzo. "Those women at the gallery." "Some of them," Sebastian admitted. "Lauren, they mean nothing to me. You know that." "But they could," Lauren said, hearing the bitterness in her own voice. "They could mean something because they have something I don't. Time. Endless, infinite time. I'm going to age, Sebastian. I'm going to get old and sick and die, and you're going to stay exactly as you are. And then you'll find someone else, some beautiful immortal creature, and I'll just be a memory." "You could never be just a memory," Sebastian said quietly. "Then what? What am I? What are we doing here?" Lauren felt tears starting, and she hated herself for it, for the weakness. "I love you. God help me, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. But I can see the end from here, Sebastian, and it terrifies me." Sebastian pulled her into his arms, and Lauren let herself cry against his chest, feeling the strange absence of a heartbeat beneath her ear. "I love you too," he murmured into her hair. "And you're right. The end is coming. It's always coming for mortals. That's the tragedy and the beauty of human existence. But we have now, Lauren. We have this moment, and this night, and tomorrow night, and all the nights that follow until we don't anymore. Isn't that enough?" "I don't know," Lauren said honestly. "I want it to be. But I'm scared, Sebastian. I'm scared of losing you, and I'm scared of asking you to turn me, and I'm scared of not asking you to turn me. I'm just scared." They talked through the night, finally addressing the elephant that had been in the room since the beginning. Sebastian explained again why he wouldn't transform her, the risks and the irreversible changes it would bring. Lauren argued through her tears that she was willing to accept those risks, That life without him seemed worse than any potential downside of immortality. "You say that now," Sebastian said gently. "In the first flush of love, when everything feels eternal anyway. But you're young, Lauren. You have so much life ahead of you, so many experiences you haven't had yet. Children, if you want them. Grandchildren. Growing old with someone who grows old alongside you. I can't give you any of that. All I can offer is an existence outside of normal life, watching from the shadows as the world moves on without you." "I don't care about any of that," Lauren insisted. "I care about you. About us. You care about that now. But feelings change. People change. And I refuse to be responsible for taking your humanity from you, only to watch you come to resent me for it decades down the line." They reached no resolution that night. Lauren eventually fell asleep in Sebastian's arms, exhausted by emotion, while he sat awake holding her, watching the dawn light begin to creep across the floor toward them, forcing him to retreat deeper into the shadows. In the days that followed, a distance grew between them. Not a distance of affection. If anything, they clung to each other more desperately than before, but a distance of understanding. They had reached the fundamental impasse of their relationship, the problem that had no solution. Lauren threw herself into her painting with renewed intensity, as if she could capture what they had on canvas and preserve it somehow. She painted Sebastian obsessively, trying to show not just what he looked like but what he was. The ageless being, the centuries of loneliness, the man who had found love again despite the cost. One painting in particular consumed her. She worked on it for days, a massive canvas that showed Sebastian standing in Piazza San Marco, but the square was filled with ghosts, all the people he'd known over the centuries, fading into transparency around him. It was heartbreaking and beautiful, and when Sebastian finally saw it, he wept. "You see me," he said, touching the canvas gently. "You truly see me. Not the romantic fantasy or the monster of legend, but the reality. The loneliness and the loss and the weight of all those years." "I see you," Lauren confirmed. "And I love what I see. All of it, Sebastian. The beautiful and the terrible." It was Cosima, the vampire who had been so cold to Lauren initially, who finally provided a different perspective. She appeared at the palazzo one evening when Sebastian was out meeting with some other vampires, and Lauren found herself alone with the ancient creature. "He won't turn you," Cosima said without preamble, settling into a chair like a queen on a throne. "You know this, yes?" "I know that's what he says," Lauren replied carefully. "He means it. Sebastian is many things, but he's not a liar. He made a mistake once, turned someone out of love, and it destroyed them both. He won't make that mistake again. So what am I supposed to do? Just accept that our relationship has an expiration date." Cosima studied her with ancient eyes. "All relationships have expiration dates, child. Even vampire ones. We're not truly immortal, just very long-lived. Eventually, we all face our endings. The question is not whether the relationship will end, but whether it's worth having at all." "Of course it's worth having," Lauren said. "Is it? Knowing the pain that's coming? The inevitable loss?" Cosima leaned forward. "I've lived for 600 years. I've loved and lost more times than you can imagine. And each time I had to decide, is the joy worth the sorrow? Is the love worth the grief that follows? Some vampires decide it isn't. They close themselves off, refuse to feel, become the monsters that humans fear. Others, like Sebastian, decide that even temporary love is better than eternal emptiness. The question is, what do you decide, Lauren Foster? Is loving Sebastian, truly loving him with full knowledge of what's coming, worth the pain of losing him someday?" "I won't lose him," Lauren said. "He'll lose me. I'll die, and he'll go on." "You'll both lose each other," Cosima corrected. "Death doesn't discriminate in that regard. The one who remains behind suffers just as much as the one who leaves, perhaps more. So I ask you again, is it worth it?" After Cosima left, Lauren sat for a long time thinking about that question. She thought about her life before Sebastian, how safe and small it had been. She thought about these past months in Venice, how alive she'd felt, how every moment had seemed vivid and real in a way that her previous existence never had. She thought about the paintings she'd created, work that was better than anything she'd done before, inspired by love and magic and the strange beauty of loving something impossible. And she realized that Cosima was right. It wasn't about whether the relationship would end. It was about whether it was worth having at all. When Sebastian returned that night, Lauren was waiting for him. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said. About living in the moment, about appreciating the time we have." "Lauren, let me finish. I want to stay with you, Sebastian. Not forever, because we don't get forever. But for as long as I have. I want to love you completely, with no reservations, no resentment about what we can't have. I want to appreciate every single night we get together, whether that's 50 more years or 5. And when my time comes, I want you to let me go. No last-minute transformations, no desperate attempts to hold on. Just let me live my natural lifespan and love me through all of it." Sebastian stared at her, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. "That's what you want. It's what I want. Can you give me that? Can you love me knowing that you'll have to let me go?" He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I've been so focused on trying to protect you from pain that I forgot the most important thing. You're not a child who needs protecting. You're a woman who gets to make her own choices, even painful ones. If you choose this, choose us, knowing everything you know, then yes, I can give you that. I can love you completely, for however long we have." They sealed the promise with a kiss, and it felt like a new beginning. They had chosen each other, fully and completely, with no illusions about forever. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. What followed were the happiest months of Lauren's life. Having made their peace with the temporary nature of their relationship, she and Sebastian were able to be fully present with each other in a way they hadn't been before. Every night felt like a gift, every moment precious precisely because they knew it wouldn't last forever. Lauren's work reached new heights. She had several shows in Venice and other European cities, and collectors began seeking out her paintings. Critics praised the emotional depth and technical skill of her work, noting that her pieces seemed to capture something essential about the intersection of the eternal and the ephemeral. She began a new series called Venice Eternal, paintings that showed the city in different eras, sometimes with Sebastian visible in them as an unchanging constant while the world transformed around him. It was her most ambitious work yet, and it required extensive research into Venetian history. Sebastian helped, of course, sometimes offering details no history book could provide because he had been there. They traveled together, always at night or on cloudy days when Sebastian could move more freely. They visited Paris and Prague, Edinburgh and Istanbul. Sebastian showed her the world through eyes that had seen it change over centuries, and Lauren showed him how to see it anew through the fresh perspective of someone experiencing it for the first time. In Paris, they stood before the Mona Lisa in the Louvre after hours, Sebastian having somehow arranged private access. Da Vinci was brilliant, he said, but impossibly arrogant. He once spent an entire dinner party explaining to us all why his interpretation of perspective was superior to everyone else's. We wanted to strangle him by dessert. Of course, he was right, which made it worse. "Wait, you knew Leonardo da Vinci?" Lauren asked, though by now she shouldn't have been surprised by such revelations. "Briefly. I was in Milan in the 1490s. He was working on the Last Supper. I watched him paint it, actually. He worked so slowly, agonizing over every detail. The monks who commissioned it were furious about the delays." These casual revelations of history experienced firsthand never ceased to amaze Lauren. Through Sebastian, the past became tangible, real in a way no history book could convey. And through Lauren, Sebastian rediscovered the wonder of seeing things for the first time, the joy of novelty that he'd thought lost to him centuries ago. They celebrated their first anniversary, though whether it counted from their first meeting or Lauren's decision to stay was unclear. In the palazzo, just the two of them. Sebastian had arranged for a string quartet to play in the courtyard below while they danced on the balcony overlooking the Grand Canal. "Thank you," Lauren said as they swayed to the music. "For this year. For showing me magic is real." "Thank you," Sebastian replied, "for reminding me why it matters. I'd forgotten, Lauren. Somewhere over the centuries, I'd forgotten why any of this was worth experiencing. You gave that back to me. But even golden times must end, and the first shadows appeared in Lauren's second year in Venice. She caught a cold that lingered longer than it should have. She felt tired more often, needing to sleep more during the day. Small things, easily dismissed, but Sebastian noticed everything. You should see a doctor, he urged. It's just a cold, Lauren protested. I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. The fatigue grew worse, accompanied by unexplained bruising and a persistent cough. Finally, at Sebastian's insistence, she saw a doctor. Then another doctor. Then a specialist. The diagnosis came on a gray winter day: acute leukemia. Aggressive and advanced. Part 11. The darkness. The world tilted. Lauren sat in the doctor's office, hearing words like chemotherapy and bone marrow transplant and survival rates, but they seemed to come from very far away. She was 29 years old. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not now. Not when she'd finally found happiness. Sebastian was with her, having figured out a way to navigate the daylight hours with heavy clothing and dark glasses. He held her hand as the doctor explained the treatment options, and Lauren felt the coldness of his skin, a reminder that he would never face this particular terror. He would never age, never sicken, never die unless he chose to. That night, back at the palazzo, Lauren raged. She threw things, she cried, she screamed at the unfairness of it all. Sebastian let her, understanding that she needed to purge the emotions before they could talk rationally. This changes things, Lauren said finally, exhausted from her outburst. The timeline we talked about, the years we thought we'd have, we might not have them. We don't know that, Sebastian said. The treatment might work, or might not. But even if it does, Sebastian, I'm sick. I'm going to be sick for a long time. The treatment alone takes months, maybe years. And there's no guarantee I'll survive it. Then we fight, Sebastian said firmly. We get you the best doctors, the best treatment. Money is no object. No. Lauren cut him off. No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to spend my remaining time, however long that is, chasing desperate treatments and clinging to false hope. We're going to live, Sebastian. We're going to live as fully as possible for as long as I have. Lauren, you can't just give up. I'm not giving up. I'm choosing how I want to spend my time. I'll do the standard treatment, the chemotherapy, because there's a chance it could work. But I'm not going to let this disease define my last months or years. I'm going to paint and love you and experience every moment I can. She took his hands. And I need you to promise me something. When the end comes, you let me go. No transformation. No desperate attempt to save me. You let me go with dignity and love. Can you promise me that? Sebastian's face was anguished. Lauren, promise me, Sebastian, please. Don't make my last act on this earth be watching you break your principles for me. Let me die as I lived, as a human who chose love over fear. I promise, Sebastian said finally, though the words seemed torn from him. I promise I'll let you go. Lauren began chemotherapy. It was every bit as horrible as she'd feared, the nausea, the weakness, the loss of her hair. She couldn't paint during the worst of it, could barely leave her bed. Sebastian stayed with her through all of it, reading to her, playing music, simply being present. The vampire community of Venice rallied around them in unexpected ways. Cosima visited frequently, bringing books and stories from her own centuries of existence. Other vampires Lauren had met over the past year stopped by to pay their respects, to offer what comfort they could. Even those who had initially been hostile to her presence seemed moved by her grace in facing mortality. You've taught us something, Cosima said during one visit. Reminded us what it means to be brave. Most vampires avoid thinking about death, our own or others. But you face it with such dignity. It's humbling. Between treatment cycles, when Lauren felt strong enough, she painted. She worked on a final series, her masterpiece, 12 paintings representing the 12 months she'd had with Sebastian before the diagnosis. Each one captured a moment, a feeling, an essential truth about their love. They were the best work she'd ever done, raw and honest and heartbreaking. The cancer responded to treatment, briefly. For a few months, Lauren was in remission, and they had a second golden period. They traveled again, to all the places on Lauren's bucket list. They returned to Constantinople, now Istanbul, where Sebastian showed her the city of his birth, walking streets that had existed in different forms for millennia. They stood on the shores of the Bosphorus at sunset, watching the water reflect the dying light. "This is where it began," Sebastian said. "Where I was born, where I lived my human life, where I died and was reborn. It feels appropriate, somehow, to be here with you now." "Everything comes full circle," Lauren said, leaning against him. "Life, death, love. It's all connected, isn't it? All part of the same eternal cycle." But the remission didn't last. The cancer returned, more aggressive than before. The doctors wanted to try more intensive treatment, but Lauren refused. She'd made her choice, and she was at peace with it. She spent her final weeks in the palazzo, surrounded by her paintings, with Sebastian never leaving her side. Friends visited. Her parents flew in from America, finally understanding why their daughter had stayed in Venice, finally meeting the man she loved despite his impossible nature. Lauren had told them everything, and though they struggled to believe it, Sebastian's obvious devotion to their daughter made them accept the inexplicable. Lauren painted until she physically couldn't anymore. Her last painting was of Sebastian, but this time he wasn't alone in Piazza San Marco surrounded by ghosts. This time, Lauren was beside him, holding his hand, solid and present. It was her gift to him, a reminder that she had been real, that their love had been real, that she would always be with him in the ways that mattered.